Now, let's move to proportionality mechanism related to applying approaches commensurate with skills, capabilities, and resources that are available to the company. This mechanism was introduced to support application of requirement in a way that is commensurate with a company's skills, capabilities, and available resources. It applies to the disclosure of information about anticipated financial effect and the disclosure of information about climate resilience, specifically related to the requirement to use climate-related scenario analysis to assess companies' climate resilience. To explain this proportionality mechanism, we will look at each of these requirements in turn.
Thanks so much, Martine. So let's focus on explaining the concept that Martine just spoke about. So this proportionality mechanism requires a company to consider its skills, its capabilities, and its available resources. That means a company's available skills, capabilities, and resources could be considered as internal and external, and they provide the context to inform its consideration of the potential cost and level of effort required by a particular approach. An important note here is that a company's circumstances are likely to change over time. Because the circumstances will change and evolve, it is expected that a company will reassess its circumstances. In other words, it is expected that companies will be able to develop their skills and capabilities over time. For example, in looking at climate-related scenario analysis, which is an evolving practice, it is expected that a company will develop skills and strengthen its capabilities and its approach to scenario analysis over time through a process of learning and iteration. Therefore, it is fair to say that the approach that an entity uses is likely to change over time. And this is part of the proportionality mechanism we discover and will discuss in the coming slides. So applying these requirements, first, a company is required to use the approach that is commensurate to its circumstances, and second, this means that the approach can be different depending on the level of skills, capabilities, and resources that are required to provide such information by a company. Specifically, we note that in IFRS S2, it specifies that a company is able to invest in obtaining or developing the necessary skills and capabilities if resources are available to the company. So in the absence of such resources, the proportionality mechanisms seek to offer the possibility for skills or capabilities to be developed over time. In summary, our proportionality mechanisms were designed to acknowledge different circumstances, but also with the expectation of improvement by entities over time. Next, let's address how the proportionality mechanisms apply to the requirements about anticipated financial effects. I'm sure you're very excited to hear this. Just to remind you, S1 and S2 require the disclosure of quantitative and qualitative information about the anticipated financial effects of sustainability-related risks and opportunities on a company's financial position, financial performance, and cash flows over the short, medium, and long term, taking into consideration how the company includes those sustainability-related risks and opportunities in its financial planning. So, this particular proportionality mechanism is applied in two different ways. Firstly, and let's call this application 1, when preparing disclosures about the anticipated financial effects of a particular sustainability-related risk or opportunity, IFRS S2 requires a company to select an approach commensurate with its skills, its capabilities, and its resources. So it is important to note that the first proportionality mechanism we covered in this webcast, reasonable and supportable information without undue cost or effort, also applies to the information used to provide disclosures on anticipated financial effects, as we can see in the green box. Secondly, and we will call this application 2, The proportionality mechanism about skills, resources, and capabilities is also applied to determine the particular information required to be provided about anticipated financial effects. That is, S2 does not require quantitative information to be provided about the anticipated financial effects of a given sustainability risk or opportunity if a company lacks the skills or capabilities to do so, or if it does not have the resources available to obtain or secure those skills and capabilities. In this case, a company is still required to provide disclosures, but there are different disclosures, including qualitative information to provide decision-useful information to investors. And as noted earlier, it is important to note that a company cannot avoid providing quantitative information for anticipated financial effects because it does not have the skills or capabilities to do so if it has the resources to obtain or develop those skills or capabilities. For more details on the disclosures on anticipated financial effects, including what needs to be disclosed when a company does or does not have the skills, capabilities, or resources to provide quantitative information about anticipated financial effects, you can watch our webcast on current and anticipated financial effects, which is already available on our website. Now let's summarize this proportionality mechanism, which is used, and it's used specifically in determining, first of all, the approach to be taken by a company in measuring and disclosing the anticipated effects about a sustainability-related risk or opportunity. And secondly, the type of information that a company is required to provide in preparing disclosures about the anticipated financial effects of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. These mechanisms accommodate companies that have fewer resources and that might find it challenging to meet the requirement related to anticipated financial effects, including the requirement to provide quantitative information. The mechanism has a temporal aspect to it, such that it provides additional time to build capacity and capability, but still allow the requirements to be met by providing qualitative information that is decision useful and available.
Thanks, Ndidi, and thanks for the overview on anticipated financial effect. Now let's look at climate-related scenario analysis and the second proportionality mechanism. IFRS S2 requires a company to disclose information about the assessment of its climate resilience at reporting date. And as part of this requirement, IFRS S2 also requires companies to use climate-related scenario analysis to assess their climate resilience. Just as a reminder, climate scenario analysis is a process for identifying and assessing a potential range of outcomes of future events under condition of uncertainty. And the ISSB recognized that the requirement to carry out such climate-related scenario analysis could be challenging for some companies that might lack the skills, capabilities, and resources to carry out such analysis. So to respond to concerns that scenario analysis might create undue cost or effort, the ISSB introduced the proportionality mechanism of using an approach that is commensurate with a company's skills, capabilities, and available resources. So that while scenario analysis is always required to be performed, the approach used will depend on the company's particular circumstances. Specifically, the mechanism requires a company to identify the approach to scenario analysis that is commensurate with its circumstances. And that is, to assess its circumstances, a company is required to consider first the company's exposure to climate-related risk and opportunities, and second, the skills, capabilities, and resources available to the company for performing the climate-related scenario analysis. We should note that the proportionality mechanism does not exempt companies from using climate-related scenario to assess their climate resilience or to provide information about how it carried out the scenario analysis. Instead, it requires a company to identify an approach to climate scenario analysis that is proportionate, and a company is required to assess its circumstances each time it carries out the climate-related scenario analysis. And finally, it's important to note that the requirements also requires companies to use an approach that enables to consider all reasonable and supportable information available to the company at reporting date without undue cost or effort. So what it means, the first proportionality mechanism we talked about in this webcast is also applied to climate-related scenario requirements. Specifically, the information that is available to the company at reporting date without undue cost or effort is considered as part of the assessment of the approach that a company is required to use for climate-related scenario analysis.
Thank you, Martine. Now let's see what this might mean in practice with an example. With this graph, we illustrate the relationship between the exposure to climate-related risks and opportunities and the available skills, capabilities, and resources of a company, and how they could both impact the assessment of the company's circumstance, which in turn impacts the approach a company uses for its scenario analysis. What this graph shows is that the greater a company's exposure to climate-related risks and opportunities, and the greater skills, capabilities, and resources available to the company to carry out the climate-related scenario analysis, the more advanced the form of analysis should be. So it graduates. In contrast, if a company has a relatively low exposure to climate-related risks and fewer skills, capabilities, and resources, it might develop a simpler approach, such as scenario narratives focused on a key product, business unit, or operating unit, to undertake the scenario analysis to meet IFRS S2 disclosure requirements. It is very important to note that climate-related scenario analysis is an evolving practice, and that the company's skills, capabilities, and resources are expected to vary based on the company's circumstances. For example, in the extractives and mineral processing industry, where climate-related scenario analysis is well established, a company in this industry would be expected to have already strengthened its skills and its capabilities through years of experience. In summary, this slide highlights that a company's approach to climate-related scenario analysis would be informed by its assessment of the entity's exposure to climate-related risks, and also an assessment of its available skills, capabilities, and resources. And as we wind to an end, it's time to conclude. And so to finish off, we would like to share some key takeaways with you. First, the ISSB's proportionality mechanisms have been designed in response to market feedback, especially from emerging markets and developing economies, to accommodate the wide range of capabilities and levels of preparedness of companies, while still enabling companies to comply with the ISSB standards and provide primary users with decision-useful information. While a company is not exempt from providing disclosures when using the proportionality mechanisms, these serve to modify the information a company needs to gather without undue cost and effort. As such, the approach required to be used to prepare the disclosures, or the type of disclosure that has to be provided, has been designed to accommodate companies' particular circumstances. Thirdly, applying the proportionality mechanisms will require judgment and is specifically relevant and unique to the company's circumstances, including its skills, capabilities, and resources. Fourth, over time, what is reasonable and supportable information available without undue costs and effort, and what could be considered commensurate with a company's skills, capabilities, and resources, is expected to evolve. In particular, the expectation is that there will be less reliance on proportionality mechanisms over time as people gain the skills, capabilities, and resources. In this regard, we hope that this webcast has given you a reasonable understanding of what the ISSB proportionality mechanisms provide, which requirements they are applied to, and how they can be applied. And with that, we would like to thank you for your time and attention today.